So second stage of the process, structuring impact. So we've decided to make this investment. What does it mean to structure it into the transaction, to structure impact?
Yeah, so just like you would be considering the terms of a loan, for example, interest rate, maturity date, how long the loan will be out for, and the terms of which they repay the loan, right? Maybe there's no payment at the beginning and then repayment later. We're also thinking about impact as a structure, as a way to incorporate into those same documents that would dictate, the terms of the loan. And this structuring it helps us think about, okay, we know where they are right now, right? Because we've just measured them against the impact criteria. We're comfortable with, as an impact investor, where they are in impact. We want to get them to paying living wage by year 2, because they're not quite yet, but they've got a factory full of people who are really enthusiastic about the job, want them to pay living wage. And so helping them figure out a path towards that, we can build that into the structure using impact covenants. And so impact covenants are the way that we incorporate impact just right into those documents, and right into the transaction. This is a step that takes place, again, when we're setting the terms. So alongside, discussing interest rates or maturity dates, we're also discussing these terms for impact covenants. Now, what's really important is that the investor and the investee, or the portfolio company, really have to be on the same page. So again, when I said before that, we want to know where they're heading, or we want to know that they're interested in paying living wage or interested in providing 401k, this is not to be used as a forcing mechanism. Including covenants that the investee is not on board with just doesn't work.
Hold on. Okay, so that is counter to everything. I mean, often when people are imposing financial covenants, right, debt coverage ratios, things like that, key person, it is a forcing mechanism. Mm-hmm. And so now people are hearing us offer the suggestion of impact covenants, and we say we're allies and we're part of solidarity economy, but it does look like power over. So can you talk about how to mitigate that dynamic?
Yeah, so, we are in partnership, and this is part of our relationship-based approach. We really are in partnership with our companies. Early on in the diligence process, we're talking about, hey, what are your goals for impact? How are you thinking about sustainability, right? How are you thinking about waste management? And if they have an idea, they don't have to necessarily have the goals yet, but if they're like, yeah, I really wish I could do that, or like, I'd love to do that sometime, in the future, we start to help them think about, like, how about if we set a goal? Because if you set a goal, then you're much more likely to actually get there, rather than it sort of being like, oh, I wish I could, right? Rather it being a wish. If it's a goal, then it's really something that you can work towards. And one of the things that we try to do is also help companies work towards those goals.
So I'm just thinking of an example I remember from our portfolio of a company, actually the same food manufacturing company, that cared deeply about paying living wages on a factory floor, which is very, very hard to do, right? Mm-hmm. That is not common in the sector. And exploring the idea of a covenant that would protect their desire to pay a living wage to their employees, mm-hmm. so that future investors, it's a signal, right? It has a signal to future investors, this is what we're committed to. And while somebody could always buy out our position and our covenant would disappear, those future investors can see what they value and hopefully value them too.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up. I think it's so important to mention that oftentimes we're not in these transactions by ourselves, right? There are other investors either that are coming in alongside us. Sometimes we're leading a round or a syndication of other loans or other equity capital, or we're in early and people are coming in after us. And everybody always looks at the documents that other investors have signed with the investee or with the portfolio company. It's one thing for a company to say, like, I really care about my workers, I want to pay living wage. And if a new investor comes in, gets a seat on the board and starts putting pressure to say, like, we need our margins to be better, we need you to bring down wages, how can you pay people less? They can say, hey, we have this agreement that this is what we're doing, this is our intention. And so putting that into writing and codifying it in the same place that you codify the terms of your loan or the terms of your equity investment is a very powerful signal.
That's great. So what does it look like? We talk about an impact covenant, but how does that actually function?
Yeah, so impact covenants, they can be included in loans, as I've been mentioning. And so essentially it's an agreement to achieve a certain impact. So let's use living wage again as an example. It's an agreement to achieve a certain impact like living wage by a certain date. And so you want to make sure your covenants are very specific, smart, in fact, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, so that they're measurable and really easy to point to and say, like, yes, I have achieved this, or no, I have not yet. Because we create financial incentives around these covenants. If you are able to achieve the covenant, one way to incentivize is to toggle the interest rate. So if you achieve it, you can say, hey, we'll charge you less interest because you're doing a great job, you've reached your goal. Or if they haven't achieved it, the investor has the right to increase their interest rate. And this is not meant to be some sort of punishment, punitive mechanism, but it is meant to incentivize and to make sure that people are really on board with what they say they are at the beginning.
So that sort of idea of using carrots and sticks.
Exactly.
Leaning toward carrots, but occasionally using a stick. I can think about one on a compensation ratio, highest paid worker to lowest paid worker, where someone was at 11-1. And we're like, wow, if you get to 5-1, highest paid worker is 5-1 lowest paid worker, we'll decrease your interest rate by half a point. Mm-hmm. But if you exceed 15-1, if you go in the wrong direction, we might raise your interest rate. Right. So I know we're biased toward the carrot, but occasionally maybe throwing a stick in there every now and then to be like, that's actually really not going in the direction we had agreed to.
Right, and I think it's really, it's agreed to all at the beginning, right? And so to kind of come back to it, I'm actually in this process right now with one company who needs to pay more attention to their gender diversity on their team. They're just really hiring all men, and I want them to pay more attention to recruiting people who are either non-binary or women.
Because they made a commitment to doing that.
Because they said they would in their impact covenants. And they've sort of been, stalling a little bit. And I said, hey, we have the right by this date to change your interest rate. And I don't want to do that. I know you don't want me to do that. Like, let's come up with a recruiting plan. And so they've come to the table and they've, so I don't like to play hardball, but occasionally you have to sort of remind people, what their original commitments were. I will mention that there's much more than living wage and compensation ratios that you can use. You can use it for implementing different benefits. You can also use it for, you could implement a zero waste policy, right, for a manufacturing facility. It's actually not one that we implemented with that food manufacturer. However, they have had such a mind for zero food waste in their factory that they've really been on that.
That's actually a good point. Like, you don't need to throw an impact covenant in when it's already there. The behavior is already aligned, 100% aligned, or
right.
There's no you think there's very low alignment risk.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. I think just as a rule of thumb, and we've learned this through practice, right? Originally, we were putting more impact covenants in. We were saying 5 impact covenants. And it's kind of too many. And also, then you end up adding ones that don't really make sense for the business. Like for a professional services business, to require them all to pay living wage, it's like they're
going to pay it anyway.
Over living wage anyway. Everybody's making, $40, $50 an hour. I'm not worried about $22 an hour.
Right. So takeaway there is don't write an impact covenant you don't need.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not, which ones can we include? It's, is it helpful in this scenario with this entrepreneur? Again, very specific to the situation. Is it helpful in this situation with this entrepreneur, this business, and the impact that we're hoping to see? Should we include between 1 and 3 impact covenants? And sometimes we don't include any. So that's an important distinction to make, that occasionally you can just say, hey, they're doing great. Their impact is so baked in and the management is so aligned that we're not going to include any impact covenants.
Okay, so I want to go back to, you talked about a toggle on loans.
Yes.
What can you do with equity? Because you can't toggle equity.
No, equity is a little trickier. But what we found is that in a side letter, what we can do is lay out kind of what happens, the remedy for what happens if they do not achieve the impact. So the impact covenants are codified in a side letter, and then we lay out that a board committee will be called and created in order to address the fact that they have not achieved their impact covenants. And so it sort of gets elevated above the day-to-day operations that the CEO is operating in, up to the board level to say, okay, we're raising this up to the governance committee, right, to say, hey, what's happening here and how do we make this right? And so that's also an interesting one, because not everybody who sits on the board is necessarily going to be an impact investor, but now it's all of their prerogative to figure out, okay, how do we make this work?
So that's on straight up debt and equity. And then of course there's hybrid instruments like royalty, and you can toggle the royalty rate, or convertible note, you can toggle the discount rate.
Yes. Yeah, we've toggled the discount rate. And even for structured equity, we've been thinking about how we toggle multiples that we will exit at the end. So there's lots of different ways to include these financial incentives, and we've been testing them out and learning as we've gone. But I think it's a really great tool to use. And I will say that we're in the minority of impact investors who actually use these types of incentives.
Yeah, I'm going to just double down on something we already said, but do not use impact covenants as power over, right? So a lot of people are like, great, impact covenants, and now we can make them do this, this, and this, and we're maintaining the separation and the power dynamic that investors often have over borrowers and investees, and I just want to reiterate that. You've given a lot of examples, but is there, this is all, it's a pretty young fund. We've only been doing Fund 1 since 2017. So are these impact covenants, have any been realized?
Yeah, a couple actually now. It's exciting. I gave the one example of the company that's not quite meeting theirs, and we've been gently calling them out on that. So that's on sort of the non-compliance side. But we've had two so far that have successfully had their interest rates brought down. One is a nonprofit organization that actually got a term loan from us, and part of their strategy is to bring on interns and people into the workforce that are kind of not usually in the energy efficiency, clean energy workforce. That's a very male-dominated field, very white field. And so bringing in people who have graduated from community college, and more women and more people of color, and international people as well, people who speak English as a second language. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that they were doing, because they had this great internship program, but how are they getting people onto their staff? And so from the internship program to the staff, is that a transition that's still happening? It was a stated goal for them. And so we said, okay, let's make it an impact covenant. Are you recruiting and hiring from the same type of pool that you're recruiting and hiring your interns from? And they have, they documented it really well, and they've shown that they have. And so we were able to bring their interest rate down 50 basis points for last year.
Great story. Thank you, Aliana. Okay.